I am being watched. Welcome everyone to my review of Person of Interest Season 1 Episode 17. It's called Baby Blue. So spoilers for the episode as always. This one's got a lot of moving parts. I was almost ready to critique the episode, the first 10 or so minutes because it's setting up a lot of things. You've got Elias's father, the gang, Don Mafia boss dude, Moretti. The dude from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, who passed away not too long ago. Actually, I don't know if he'd passed away when he first popped up in this show. I don't know if that had happened yet. That might have been a thing that's happened in the meantime. So I was sad to hear that, obviously. But you've got him getting out of jail, and that's kind of a big plot point early on. You also have the person of interest to this episode turning out to be a baby, and that kind of is what the A plot really is. But there's a lot going on here in terms of Fusco's got his own little thing going on that ties into all this. Obviously Carter's got multiple plates spinning. Reese and Finch have multiple plates spinning between the two things going on. There's a lot happening, but it does all come together very, very well. I was very surprised. Well, I shouldn't say surprised, but I was pleasantly impressed, I suppose this is the way I'll put it, with how everything kind of came together in a really natural way. Because a lot of the first half of the episode has a lot of comedy in it, right? There's a lot of comedy of, oh shit, the person of interest is a baby. And that actually made sense because one of the things that Finch was looking at when he was getting the number is this social security number is not really attached to anything. This person doesn't have a history. There's no, and that makes sense because it's a baby. The baby's not done anything yet, so that all makes sense. And then from there, it's okay, someone's after the baby, so Finch takes the baby, and we get just lots of little moments with Finch and Reese having to be dads for a little while. I particularly love the playpen made out of piles of books that Finch has made in the base for the kid. It's a wonderfully little temple of knowledge, shall we say. No kids books, of course, because Finch isn't prepared for that. And then of course there's also the scene later on where the kid gets a hold of one of the tear gas grenades, which gives everyone a bit of a chuckle. Well, not the characters, gives me a chuckle, but it doesn't give the characters much to be amused about. But what's so good about it is that, so this is all going on whilst you've got the hiding the mafia boss from Elias, into a safe house, and Carter's dealing with that. Reese is kind of paying attention to that as well. And there's a lot of plate spinning, like I said. But what's so good about it is that halfway through the episode or so, when the baby is actually kidnapped by bad guys, right? They're going to give the kid to the grandparents of the kid because the mother's been killed. That's part of the case. And when they get there, it turns out, no, there's bad guys waiting, and the kid gets taken, Finch gets injured. Once that turn happens, what's so good about this episode is that all that lighthearted stuff in the first half with them trying to look after the kid, and it's all very cute and funny, all of a sudden, the back half of this episode has so much stakes and weight to it, because now we have to save that kid. Now that kid has been taken by violent criminals and might be shipped off out the country, so she's hidden away and we'll never see her again. And once she's out of the country, we'll never find her. It'll basically be impossible. And I think the weight attached to that, because we spent the first half of the episode just not even getting to know her, because it's a baby, it's not a character in the same way that an adult is, or even an actual child is. This is before all those stages. But seeing Reese and Finch struggling to look after her and becoming attached to her, Reese even wearing the pouch thing for the baby to sit in his front as he's talking to Carter in one scene. All of that adds all this weight to the second half of the episode, because it becomes this hunt to find her, and it feels like Reese is everything else fades away. All the stuff going on with Elias and Moretti and all the other shit just vanishes, because it's no, the laser sights are on. I have to save that baby. That's kind of what happens with Reese, and you kind of get into it, I think, as the audience, because you completely get why this means a lot to him now. And it's like, this is someone who's purely innocent to save, and she can't even understand that she's being kidnapped, and her life is going to be very, very different if she ends up somewhere after being smuggled to a different country. And I think one of my favorite scenes in the whole episode is when he storms into the rich couple's house. So I don't know why I have to explain all of this, but there's a whole, like, they're doing their usual thing, trying to figure out what's going on, and it's like, okay, who is this baby? Who's the mother? Who's the father? And there's a thinking that it's a cover-up because it was a kid that was had as part of an affair, and they think it's the son of this rich family at first, but then he turns out to be gay, and then they think, well, it's the father, and it does turn out to be the father who had the affair, but the twist in this scene is that it's the wife of the rich guy who actually had the woman killed. Right, not even just had the woman killed, she murdered the woman that slept with her husband with a candlestick. No, it wasn't a candlestick, it was I think it was just a light stand. Regardless, she murdered her with a blunt weapon, and then then paid people to clean up the crime and kidnap the baby to sort of remove all of the evidence of everything. The way that Reese just storms into this scene like he's the Terminator and doesn't care about the consequences, doesn't care about being stealthy or keeping under the radar or anything like that. He just storms in, grabs the guy by the neck, and starts demanding answers. And it just really gets across just how much it's like, okay, all of the usual bullshit, no one cares. Let's get the kid back. Nothing else matters. And I think that urgency to the back half of the episode really made this feel great. And this all boils down as well to tying back into Elias and tying back into these core themes. So when Reese runs out of options, when he's tried, aggravating the mob and demanding answers from gangsters and whatever else, he realizes that his one course of action is to ask someone who's in the underworld for help, and that someone is Elias, who's been mentioned throughout the episode because of like the Moretti stuff and like keeping him safe from Elias. But this is the first time we actually see him in the episode, is when Reese calls for his help and has a meeting with him and appeals to Elias because, hey, this kid's kind of been abandoned in the same way you were, and maybe that'll appeal to his kinder side. Of course, though, once Reese does save the kid from the kidnappers who are handing it over to a different mob to, get out of the country, Elias's men, including the cop with the scar face, they ambush him. And Elias's plan to find out where Moretti is, who Carter has hidden in a safe house somewhere in the city, is to trap Reese in a refrigerated truck with the baby. And the idea being that this isn't, Reese can survive however long in these temperatures, but the baby won't last as long. So it's proper sinister. This is actually a very dark plan, and I think that also added some edge to this. So again, just to reiterate the sequence of events here in terms of like first half of the episode with the baby, very lighthearted. It's cute to see the two awkward guys who aren't really used to dealing with this struggle with it, but care about her. And then the urgency of like having to find her and save her and really feeling the weight of that. And then after you've had that section, you then have Elias put that baby in jeopardy to achieve his own goals, and it feels super sinister. I think that's what makes this episode so affecting, is that every single state that we go through is heavily informed or enhanced by what we just went through before. So the fact that we went through so much to get this baby back, and we see how much everyone cares, Elias just using the baby as this pawn to manipulate Reese is really effective. And it's why it never feels like a betrayal to the audience that Reese does eventually give in. Reese eventually tells him what he wants to know. He gives up the safe house location. Once Finch eventually shows up and Reese breaks out of the truck, there's a race to get to where Elias is. Reese calls Carter, tells her that they know where he is. But when they get there, the other good cop, the one who's not dirty, who's been in on this whole thing with Elias, with Carter, has been shot. This is kind of a breaking point for Carter. So this is a big consequence of this episode, is that the way Reese and Finch do things ultimately resulted in this man being shot. And obviously we understand that Reese was pushed against the wall here, and he ultimately had to make the decision he did. But Carter's point being is that, hey, if you had just, got the police more involved at some point, we wouldn't have went down this rabbit hole. We could have dealt with getting the kid back, our way, without going to Elias. It's that decision to turn to Elias for help instead of the police that ultimately is this point here. And Carter says she can't do this anymore. She tells him to go. She doesn't want to arrest him, but she tells him to go and that she can't work with him and Finch anymore. I don't expect that's going to last very long. I think Carter's going to be in a position where she needs their help at some point, probably because so much of the police force are dirty. There's more talk of HR this episode. In fact, they want Fusco to find out where Elias is. They want him to, because they know that Carter's the one who but saved Moretti at the start of the episode. When he gets out of prison, some of Elias's goons attack him so they can kidnap him, and she's the one who steps in with Reese. So they know that she's involved in keeping him safe. So they ask Fusco to find out, right? And obviously he owes them for that, whole dead body cover-up thing. The interesting character beat for Fusco here is that he lies. He actually does follow her. He finds out where Moretti is. He sees it. And he still lies to the cop representing HR. You're not sure if he's going to in the moment, but he does. And it's almost, again, just dramatically really ironic, or maybe ironic's not the word, but the idea that he holds out and doesn't give up that information when he's supposed to be the dirty one, and then maybe in the next couple of scenes, Reese is forced to give up the location himself through understandable and very nefarious means. They're effectively slowly killing this child to make him talk, and Reese, being the hero he is, has to eventually give in. But it is interesting that it's not Fusco who gives him that information this episode. That's why this episode, by the time you get to that last 10 minutes, and all of these things are all connected and they're all hitting off each other really well, where Fusco's not giving up the location but Reese is forced to, and that affects how Carter feels about working with them. All of this stuff, and then ultimately, of course, Elias getting to Moretti, and that's the cliffhanger of the episode, is that it's like, hey dad, I've got you now. All of this stuff, all linking together and working, is really nice. It feels really intricate in the way that everything just naturally comes and fits together. Even something as simple as, we know that Fusco didn't turn on Carter, so when Carter's willing to sort of bring him along to an arrest towards the end of the episode, it feels like he deserves to be included. But then she gets a call from Reese and has to ditch him anyway, and you feel kind of sad for him. And I think that's also quite smart, that we're kind of starting to sympathize with him quite a bit, I think. And we're sort of rooting for the others to give him a bit more respect, because he's kind of proving himself to the audience by this point. At least a little bit. We're seeing these things. He didn't have to lie in that moment. He made that choice. Reese wasn't watching. Reese wasn't following. I mean, you could argue that he should have told Reese and Finch that he'd been asked to do this, but he still made the right choice ultimately to not turn her in, or turn in Elias, or not Elias, Moretti, sorry. I'm mixing my bad guys up. So I think all that's really smart, and there's fun sequences throughout. I mentioned Reese storming into the rich family home to demand to know where the baby is, and I actually also really enjoyed the part of this where the husband is like, yeah, I admit I had an affair, and then he finds out what his wife's done, and he's like, wait, how could you do that? I would never do such a thing. Yeah, I had an affair, but I wouldn't murder someone and kick a baby out the country. I actually really like that, because there is levels to this. There's having an affair, which is not a nice thing to do, but it's not anywhere nearly in the realm of murder, kidnapping, and all these other things that his wife ended up being a part of. So I found that darkly kind of humorous, that he's like, what could you do? This is way worse than what I did. You murdered someone. I thought that was funny. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed him beating up the guys in the bar. It did that kind of smart, witty cutaway thing where he's only just kind of got the one guy that he's questioning. When the scene cuts away, we go to something else, and when it cuts back to the scene in the bar, you just see all these bodies lying around that Reese is obviously one by one beat the shit out of, trying to get answers out of this East European mobster about where the kids went. I really, just fun little touches like that are really good. And there's even some other tension that just naturally happens, like when Elias's men ambush Reese after he saved the baby and they put him in the freeze truck and all that. Finch just drives down to like where his last location was, and I was getting kind of worried, like, hey, Finch, Elias and his men, I don't think they went to a very different location. They're not miles away. I'm pretty sure they're still in the vicinity. So I got kind of worried that he was going to run into Elias and his dudes, and where would that go? In fact, hell, even Finch going on his own to the hospital to find out who the new person is, and it turns out to be the baby, and it's clear that there's two, nefarious people dressed as orderlies coming down the hall to like try and kidnap the kid. You're like, oh shit, Finch is in some jeopardy here. But Reese has got other things going on. So those little moments are still very effective, I think, because Finch is so, he's not a fighter. So when you put him in these situations where he might have to try and get away from someone who's dangerous, it's not the same as with Reese. With Reese, you feel like he can take a licking and keep on going. You feel like sometimes he can be the unstoppable badass, but Finch isn't that. So when you get those little scenes or those little moments, it works quite well. Yeah, it's so funny because there's a portion early on in this episode where it's like, okay, the family's arguing and it seems like the son might be covering something up, and Reese follows him, and then obviously the reveal is that he's gay, and so it's probably not him that had the illegitimate baby. I was genuinely thinking that we were going to be focusing on this character, but once you find out he's gay, you never see him again for the rest of the episode because he's not the suspect anymore. He's not important to the plot anymore. But it's funny because we've seen so many of these episodes now that I was expecting him to be the guy that Reese gets to know and like talks to, like a lot of these other episodes, like last episode with the stockbroker dude. That's not what this episode was, and I think that was what kept it very fun for me. Is while it did feel like there was a lot to set up early on, the way it kept kind of subverting my expectations as to how this is going to settle into a normal episode. And I think the genius of it is that it never settled into a normal episode, and instead just kept raising the stakes. So you ended up being the characters get attached to the baby's put in jeopardy, and then one of the real villains of the show, Elias, puts the baby in like really intentional jeopardy, and it feels really sinister. And it gives us a reason to really want to take Elias down. It's one thing when because we know that he's got more order and his organized crime. He wants to control everything, and Reese even appeals to him by saying, "Hey, you want a world that's still got rules, and going after children, that's chaos and whatever." But then we see Elias do this. So it's like, despite the fact that you are at least saying you want a more orderly underworld that you can control and have standards in, you still did this. And he does claim at the end, like, he knew Reese would give in. He would never hurt a child, and he knew Reese wouldn't. So that's why he never felt like, he was going against his own code. We still see this kid, like, stop crying as if it's maybe seriously being affected by this in a health way. When Reese gets out of the truck and he takes the baby to like another car and like turns on the heating and tries to like heat the baby up, it does feel like, is the baby just dead? Like maybe it's not going to survive this, and that would have been really dark to go down that path. Obviously, you do get the slightly happy ending of it, getting to go and live with its grandparents at the end. And Reese obviously starts pondering about fatherhood and how in their line of work they'll probably never really get a chance to. Although one could argue that Finch's machine is his baby, and maybe thematically that's the point, because it does this really neat cut here when it cuts to the last scene of Moretti being taken to Elias, and he says, "Hey Dad." The last thing Finch says is, "The problem with kids is you never know how they're going to turn out." And, cut to this father-son, this really weird father-son strained relationship between Elias and Moretti. But, I do wonder if there's an intentional theme that's sort of been running into some of these episodes. Obviously, we had the kids a couple episodes ago who talked about Reese being a Ronin. We've had other stories with parental figures. Obviously, Finch himself has the Ingram's son that he's been dealing with. Carter's got a kid who's a teenager. We know Fusco's got kids. I'm not saying it's been a super heavy theme throughout, the season, but there has been a couple of kid-related things recently, and I do wonder if that is an intentional parallel to the machine being Finch's kid, in a manner of speaking. I wonder if that is something they're starting to sort of sprinkle in as an overall idea. I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching for greater meaning where it's just there just happens to be two kid related episodes in the span of like what, 4 episodes. So no, I really like this one though. I think it's got a lot of moving parts, like I said, which does feel a little overwhelming at the start. At the very least, as someone who reviews and knows that I'm going to talk about the episode, like I think the only difference for me watching an episode versus someone else who's just watching it purely for joy is that sometimes when there is so many moving parts early on, I'm thinking, oh shit, how am I going to talk about all these? There's so many things going on. And what almost always happens is that it does neatly come together in a way where you don't have to talk about the individual little details the whole time. Like, that's not really the important part. The important part is what they all kind of achieve in doing. And ultimately, this all came together very, very nicely over the course of the episode. So, as a winner, I'm happy with it. So, by all means, let me know what you thought of Baby Blue in the comments as we're going into kind of the final chunk of the season. You know, the last, 6 episodes now we got left. So we'll see how things pan out next time. But this has been my thoughts on Person of Interest. And of course, you can support all the content by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting everything over there. Or you can become a member on YouTube if you'd prefer to do it that way. A new thing I'm offering, actually, if you're interested in an older show being reviewed, is exclusive to patrons and YouTube members. I just started reviewing Columbo as a monthly thing, because they're basically TV movies each episode. And the first one of those is out and up, both on Patreon and in the YouTube membership. So, yeah, if you want to get something bonus and also support the content, that's a way of doing it. But thank you very much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?